Welcome to another episode of Understanding the Science of You, where we are focused on helping people to break out of the mold, holding them back, and build bridges to their most productive selves by having vulnerable and real conversations, so that we can be relatable to others and help each other feel comfortable in our own skin and win together, right? I think that's, that whole like win together thing. I don't know if it's just, a political landscape. I don't know if it's just, energy changes what, but that whole as I'm just kind of thinking about changes in my life and where I'm going, that concept of winning together versus what do you call it, at the expense of each other, right? That's we can get a lot farther, and there's no doubt that an infusion of that would be very well warranted out there today. So I don't even know what got me down that rabbit hole exactly. But, today I'm just going to say Dr. Eleanor is joining us. And I always get concerned about butchering last names, so I tend to make things simple. But Dr. Eleanor, what's the correct full pronunciation of your name for our listeners?
Eleanor Haspel-Portner.
Haspel-Portner. I don't know why you struggle with Haspel-Portner, but yes, thank you. And that's going to be important, guys, because after we get done talking, you're going to be like, oh, wow, she knows some pretty cool stuff. She's had some experiences, so I probably want to reach out to her. So, that's don't worry. We'll also make sure to post the contact information later. So Dr. Eleanor and I came together because we were both on a mutual acquaintance, a friend of mine, Sunshine, actually, who was our very first podcast episode on her podcast. And we were introduced there. And then I followed up afterwards in a professional sense, trying to understand her approach to human design. And she definitely, gave me some new perspectives and new ways to think about things. And we enjoyed it. And we got talking. And so Dr. Eleanor was kind enough to offer to come in and share her story. Also, the synchronicity of certain conversations these days has been wonderful. And the timing of this conversation and the synchronicity of it is also extremely important, because I find myself trying to understand like audience and some workshops and how to expand things into more actionable information and understanding the ages. And as I'm going through that, one of the things that had occurred to me is that many of the guests that I talked to, and yourself included, and we're going to talk about this today, which is really exciting, is that unlike me, you have a lot of memories of a child and having different experiences than what was most common, the other kids were having. And, knowing myself in my gifts today, right, I look back and I don't have like those memories where I was like, oh, I knew I was different or this or that, right, up until, frankly, fairly recently, often considered my age of life. And so, I'm really fascinated to better understand, and I'm sure that as plenty of listeners are too, because they'll be like, oh, that's what that experience was as a child, or, and be able to maybe put some words or to different experiences that maybe struggled with because they weren't traditional. So I'd love to, if you don't mind, kind of sharing a little bit about when you recognized yourself as kind of having some different experiences, or or even whatever words you use as well to kind of understand yourself, and what that was like and how you kind of became comfortable with yourself, and if that was whatever. Yeah, so let's just start there and let us know how to get to know you.
Well, the interesting thing is that I was never really interested in being a clinical psychologist, because I thought so many of the clinical psychologists I knew were neurotic, and basically I didn't want to be one of them. But I knew from childhood that I remembered things, and I was clearly different. I could see auras from the time I was born. I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't realize it until after I had my PhD and I was in training analysis, both in a Freudian and a Jungian training analysis, and I was in training as a Jungian analyst. And I had a memory, and the memory was, well, I always knew and remembered being born, because my first memory was of being cold, and I was a C-section, born in December. So
Fascinating.
Cold was always awful for me. But the memory that surfaced was of being held by my father. And I remembered my mother being there. And I remembered the energy between them. And all of a sudden, the energy shifted. And I must have been 2 months old, and I began to squirm, and I was uncomfortable. But I was uncomfortable by the energy, not in myself. And my father didn't know what to do with me. And I have no idea why I had the intelligence to do this, but I realized unconsciously that there was no percentage in trying to be recognized or understood. And so I didn't stop seeing auras, but I stopped communicating about them directly or attempting to do it directly. And I remember as a young child saying things and doing things, and the look on people's face when I said the truth and the truth wasn't to be spoken. But I couldn't do it differently. And fortunately, both my father and my mother, not so much my siblings, and I was the youngest of 5, but my parents would say, leave her alone. Or when I'd want to do something, they would say to me, if you want to do it, we trust your judgment, do it. So while it wasn't always an easy environment, I got support for the core of my being. And that's something that has really followed me as in my career, in recognizing that the main pain that people feel when they come to me for therapy or coaching is that they haven't really been acknowledged for the core self, the I that is their spiritual being and their essence. And so I've dedicated my career to empowering people and trying to fully understand what I was seeing and knowing and perceiving in people. I've gone pretty deep into all 4 worlds we live in. And so my real work is delineating the mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical worlds as they integrate in a human being, and telling people that we all live in multiple dimensions, and that I've learned from my research and my clinical work that each world is state specific and communication specific. So it opens the door to empowering people at a whole different level.
So speaking of that, I want to kind of get like of the taking of the information and communicating, and this is where I kind of get a little literal. So please be patient with me, because I think that, at least I can speak for myself, right? If somebody would have ever asked me throughout the majority of my life if I considered myself as having any sort of, you know, gifts, psychic, mediums, what channeling, whatever somebody wants to classify it, I would be like, no, no way, not at all, right? Turns out, as you my human design, which is the exact opposite, right? I'm like,
Right.
I'm a walking, psychic channel and stuff. And so, um, but because of there's a lack of description of out there, right? There's a lack of relatability to know what it is, aside from like sci-fi or comic books or things that get really extreme, right, versus real. And so I think that that's one of the things I try to focus on in these conversations, is helping people to be like, oh, that's kind of what that is. Okay, right? Like, I don't know. I just kind of thought that it was normal for people to look like a walking around light bulb with, certain color floating around them, right? I don't know if that, but like for me, like I don't see people that way. I'm saying that, but I really don't know how it works, right? So that's kind of my question to you is, when you say that, is it literal for you when you see people, that you actually see the color around them, or is it that you kind of take in the information from them? That's how you define that for you. Yeah.
I had a huge Kundalini experience in January of 1974, and I describe it as a direct experience of God. And I was shown a lot of things, and it changed my life. When you have a direct experience of the divine, your life changes. And over the next few years, I'd be sitting with a client as the therapist, and they'd be telling me something, and I'd say to them, wait a minute, what happened when you were 5? Or who was the person who took care of you before you were 6 months old? I would see things. And I didn't know how I was perceiving it. But over a period of about 5 years, I learned how to see and how not to see. Because when the door opened and I realized that I knew a lot more about my clients than what they had ever told me, and they began to validate what I was seeing, I also could see things about people on the street. And I didn't want to see things about people without, number one, getting permission from them to look. And number two, I didn't want information I had nothing to do with. And the turning point for me was being at the airport in Phoenix with my mom. And the lady at the next table was going to die in 24 hours. And I started crying. And I said, what do I do with this? You know, I don't want to know this about people. And I learned how not to see. So when I do look, what I see is the energetic layers around people. It's not one thing, it's an energy around someone. And through my human design system that I've developed, which is based on the science of it and integrates all four worlds, I learned that my gift is of hearing whether what somebody is saying to me is really aligned at the core of their being. If it is, I hear resonance. And if it's not, I hear dissonance. So part of my gift in working with people is to be able to say to them, wait a minute, you're saying this, but is that really what the core of your being wants?
Yeah, you just hit on something really critical that I just want to interrupt you and draw the listeners' attention to, which is because we are not taught, generally speaking, right? We're not taught how to understand beyond the five senses as a child. Right.
Right.
And so because of that, like you said, there's a burden that comes with knowing, or the burden that comes with the abilities and gifts, right? And so as a result of that, if you don't not taught how to do that, then then subconsciously, right, like your body you'll turn the stuff off. And so
Right.
I'm saying that because there's a lot of people that I know that would be like, I wish that I had, I'd love to have spidey senses to kind of help me navigate the world. And like, well, you know what?
Everybody can see auras.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna say everybody that's got like spidey senses, but you'd be surprised how many of you guys have turned them off because you didn't
well,
recognize them, didn't know how to use them, and
well,
things of that nature. So that's what I just want to draw people's attention to. Sorry, yeah, you were gonna.
yeah, I was with a couple and their 7-month-old baby, and in the middle of the lunch, I mean, the baby and I really connected. We just locked eyes, and we couldn't take our eyes off each other. And about midway through lunch, I turned to the mother and I said, "Are you aware your baby sees energy?" She went, "What?" And I said, "Your baby is responding to the energy around her. And it's important to acknowledge it." And then later she said to me, the only time her baby ever gets upset is when she puts her in a car seat. And I said, do you acknowledge that she feels trapped? Do you acknowledge what you perceive her feelings are? She said, well, I'd say to her, I'm sorry, I have to put you in a car seat. I said, listen to what she's telling you on a subtle level of energy and acknowledge it for her, because she's communicating non-verbally to you what her experience is, and words aren't going to do it. You have to communicate energetically. You have to mirror the energy of the child. And parents don't know. They just don't know. They condition it out. My grandson was a preemie, And when he was about 6 weeks old, he's looking around my room. He was laying on my floor, just, like, and I was beginning to worry because he wasn't smiling at me. And he was 6 weeks old. And I didn't know what to expect from a preemie. And then I realized he was looking at the energy. And I said, "Oh, Noah, you're looking at the energy." He looked directly in my eyes and smiled. And I said to my daughter, "Noah sees energy. Don't condition it out." Now, I didn't condition it out of my children because I knew they were seeing energy. So my daughter's a medical intuitive and a psychologist specializing in chronic health. And my son is a super computer genius because he feels the energy of the computer. So what I'd like your listeners to know is if they have children, talk to the child's energy, talk to the soul. Don't forget the mental world, talk to the soul.
So let's talk about that a bit, because I think that's one thing that I've run across and parents, and I say parents and I say the different five senses. Look, I've come across that some may, depending on what a parent's belief system is, right? That parent may fall underneath the gifted category, a psychic category, being extra sensitive, neurodiversity, right? Any of those buckets, right? If any of that's kind of stuff, that would be like, I'm just throwing it out there as a first place to start. But let's say, all right, you've said, okay, some of that stuff, could be applicable to my kid. Now, parents aren't taught how to listen to their soul either, right? So we got to so how do we help the parents then to better understand and connect to their inherent?
Well, I'm going to start teaching about the four worlds in August.
All right.
And on July 22nd, I'm going to release a 5-day experience of the four worlds. It's entitled "Step Over the Threshold to a new you" in 5 days. And I'm going to talk about each world and the skills you need in each world and what each world is about. So the spiritual world is the unifying integrated field of consciousness, in my view. And that's where every experience we have is a working of the divine with our soul. And the more in touch we are with who we are as a consciousness, the more integrated we are and can be in the other worlds, because we're living in alignment to who we are. And people need to be taught the skills. Communication in the spiritual world is a communication that does not carry kinesthetic, visual, or auditory cues. So as soon as we ask a question that leads somebody in a certain way, we're no longer in the spiritual dimension. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Well, yes, it makes sense. I don't obviously know I'm not going to pretend to understand the worlds as cleanly as you do, and you do that, although, I'm trying to with our work together. Right. And I find it very interesting. And I can say that, even though I don't know the same words or I'm not able to articulate things the same as you, when we talk in our sessions, my experiences match what then you would describe. And I go, yeah, that's it. Okay. Right. So,
well, let me define the worlds for you. Okay. The mental world is the world we live in every day. The world of work, the world of our culture. We live in the Western culture, we dress a certain way. If we lived in Eastern culture, we dress a different way. We have a language that shapes our thinking by our words and the syntax and all of that. That's the mental world. The emotional world is an interesting world because in the actual emotional world, we're here to transform emotional reactivity into a higher frequency, love and compassion and forgiveness. And emotional reactivity only exists in the physical world and the mental world. So when we're emotionally reactive, if you're engaging on the mental level, you're not going to get a resolution. In order to resolve emotional reactivity, you need to take it spiritual. You need to ask, what do I want to have happen? And what feels aligned to me? What is it for me to learn from this emotional reaction? So emotional reactivity, anger, all of the typical emotions are there to teach us something and for us to move beyond the ordinary parameters into, what do I need to learn from this reaction? Where did it come from in me? Usually it's a past association. So the emotional angelic world, I call it, is a transformative world that puts you back in alignment with your true spirit, which is aligned. And the physical world is the world of the biological body. It sort of operates automatically, but we need to take care of it. We need to read it. We need to listen to it. The kinds of questions for spiritual alignment are, what do I know about this now? And what else do I know? Is it inside of me or outside of me? And what difference does it make if I know X? And a key for most people before they take any action would be, am I in the right space? Am I going in the right direction? You could say, do I love what I do or what I'm doing? Am I joyful being where I am? Those are all core questions. And, I always say, I've never worked a day in my life because I love what I do and I do what I love. And that's really a gift that I've been given. And I'm very grateful that I do work I love and love what I do.
Speaking of that, you mentioned to me another interesting point about that. And I think this is one of the challenges that people in spiritual journeys and mainstream and income, right, where they're trying to find this balance, right, of how do I find these lives and right. And I made a comment and you, which I greatly appreciated, challenged me. And you said, no, that's still your old executive brain thinking. Right. And right. And that was like a cobweb in the closet that was still sitting there. I wasn't aware of. Right. And thinking about that, what I'm specifically referring to is when you said to me, you said, look, I got my PhD to support, the spiritual work and credibility and things like that. But, I chose how I'm paraphrasing, so please correct me, right? You made the decision of how you wanted to enter into the workspace, and as a result of, right, operating in line with you and your path, and you didn't go the traditional routes and let's say of advertising and all those other things. And yet, like you said, you always got what you needed. So tell a little bit. I think that's a really important.
Well, I'll use a current example. I'm getting ready to teach to human design practitioners so they learn the truth about the system and expand it. And I'm also wanting to teach about the four worlds. And I was planning classes and thinking, oh, I'm going to teach and blah, blah, blah. And then I sort of fell back into myself. And I said, I can't do this. I can't teach academically. I got out of college teaching because I didn't want to be one of those people who teaches to teach for somebody else to do the same thing, but it's not really connecting with who they are. And all of a sudden I said, I can't teach that way. So I announced in my webinar that I'm going to teach in groups of 10 to 12 people, not a bigger group than that. I want to know my students. I want to know their issues. I want to know what they want to learn. I want to know who they are. Because if I'm really going to be a teacher and educate people on the four worlds, they need to be living authentically themselves. And it's my job as a teacher, not just to give them the intellectual skills that they can use, but to make sure that they're aligned within themselves for what's important for them, for what's meaningful for them, and to do it their own way. It's not cookie cutter. I don't use a formula. No two charts that I read are the same. And everybody needs communication that meets their needs. I don't impose it upon anybody. And I don't want to go into a class with an agenda that I impose on my students. I want my students to be open, and I go where they need me to be. And so that's an example of how, when I got in touch with what's right for me, I had to redesign my classes so I could get what I need and really give my students what I'm there to give them, which is give them their spirit back, give them their soul back, and tell them, when you know what you know because you know it, and nobody can tell you you don't know it, stand up for it and live it. It's not the way the world usually functions, but I'm not really of this world.
And you talk about the way this world functions, and I think that that's an interesting point, because I think that one could argue that the way this world works, yes, there is absolutely, a system and infrastructure and all those kind of things that, is man systems, and the world works that way. There's also the other part of this, though, which says, hey, there's also universal laws and nature's laws and other things, that supersede, man's desires. So, so they can operate in conflict and otherwise, right? And so they say, hey, it may seem like I'm not operating inside of the flow of, traditional, but I'm operating inside of the the initial design, right? I don't know what to say, right? Or the intelligent design, right, of the system. And as a result of that, you get the benefit, right, of being supported by the system as it, yeah.
When you live from your creative intelligence, everything flows, because then you're one with the universe.
Again, creative, I'm starting to write this down, creative intelligence. So, and so, I'll use some like synchronicities would be how I would have kind of described it, right? And so you talk about that. How have you, for yourself, come to recognize those different synchronicities that affirm to you that what you're believing is either accurate, or that you're on the right track?
Everything flows. When you're on the right path, there are synchronicities. I call it God's hand. And I see it working every day in my life. I had an example today. I made a phone call because I needed a new credit card, a duplicate credit card. And the banker said to me, "Oh, we have a better credit card for you." Okay. Things just flow, effortless. And you get support, you get confirmation. Things fall into place. When there's frustration, pull back and reassess. If it's not flowing, there's a reason. Something's misaligned. And look at where it's misaligned.
I could go down a few rabbit holes here for the sake of time, and I want to touch on it. I want to make sure listeners really, and I plug you appropriately here, because listeners, if you haven't, if you're like driving or whatever, make sure to stop and re-listen, because there's a lot of very deep wisdom that Dr. Eleanor has shared, and she made it sound really simple, but there's nothing simple about the concepts, everything else behind it. And so I just want to make sure that everybody, just make sure to recognize that. But also then, as you listen to her approaches, there's a lot of questions to drive a self-guided journey, which is something that I'm a huge advocate of, right? Right. Dr. Eleanor is not trying to put anybody, she's helping people to find their soul and their spirit back. And one of the questions that I had I was going to ask about, but you kind of answered it, was guiding, like, how do you, like with the parents listening, how to guide them to interact and communicate with their children that whose reality they can't relate to, right? But you nailed it. And again, very simply, which was support their decisions.
Support their decisions and ask them a simple question. In fact, this one simple question, if you're in an argument with someone, will end the argument immediately. So use it with your children. What would you like to have happen? Given all this, what would you like to have happen? If a parent said to a child who's in the middle of a conflict, what would you like to have happen? The child is being given empowered authority over himself. It's simple. You know, we're making it so complex. And just ask, what do you want? What do you know? And then the child is empowered. But then don't deny it. If a child says, I want X to happen, oh, that's not possible. You disempower it.
So it's obvious that what you have to offer a lot of insights to a wide range of people and a wide range of experiences and ages and things like that, and family dynamics, etc.
Right.
So for the listener, is there a certain type of ideal, client of yours, or what would you say? Who are the type of people that should be reaching out to you?
People who are interested in self-growth and consciousness and are interested in maximizing their potential without compromising their soul.
Yeah.
And I value integrity and honesty and authenticity. And actually, when I moved from Chicago to California, I decided to move my practice from my office to my home because I wanted my clients to see that I live the way I tell them they can live. So I live transparently. I do what I say what I do. I have a happy marriage. My husband and I have been married for 46 years. We've been together since the day we met in India. And I went to India because a voice told me to go. I had no interest in the ashram, but a voice said, go. I ended up going, and I met my husband at the day and time my mentor astrologer told me I'd meet somebody. We lived a mile from each other and knew all the same people and had never met. So
that's quite that's quite a synchronicity.
Well, it's being honoring the voice that tells you what you should do and know, and instead of denying it, you say, okay. And when I'm challenged in my life, there's one question I always ask. I always say, okay, God, what is so important that you would put this challenge in front of me? What do I need to learn? So any of you listeners who are open to learning more about who they are from themselves, not from me. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do or who they are. I'm going to give them the constructs to explore on their own and find their own way back to themselves.
And how do they reach you?
They can email me at ehp@noble, Noble, sciences.com. Or they can contact me through nobleenergywellness.com, which is the website where we do the webinar every Thursday at noon. It's a free webinar.
All right.
And it will remain free. It's free for a week. We've just moved to a paywall. So the webinar is free. The recording of it is free for a week. And then it moves behind a paywall. And the archives from 2023 and 2024 are all available. There are recordings, there are transcripts, there are summaries, there are materials. And I have 4 bestsellers so far and a new book coming out in the next week or two, which is available for pre-order, which is actually for human design practitioners. And it's a book of the integrated channels in all the worlds. And there are 148 integrated channels. So it's a manual for reading integrated charts. I'm taking pre-orders for that one. My other books are on Amazon and in bookstores.
It's pretty obvious that you have based on your desire and transparency with content, and look, everybody needs to make a living, and there's always finding that balance, right? And you've definitely erred on the side of, like you said, transparency and providing information for enablement and empowerment for each individual, and I think that's beautiful. And I think that I wish that there was more of that was out there. And so we're definitely going to have you back as there'll be when we get into some of our technical series where you and I will jump into some of the human design stuff. And I look forward to that one here as well. But we're going to post your information as well. So if people were driving, they weren't able to write it down, don't worry. Listeners, I hope you guys really enjoyed all of the deep and loving knowledge and perspectives that Dr. Eleanor had to share. And I hope that some of you feel compelled or to reach out as well. I can tell you that I have definitely enjoyed my learnings with her as well. So thank you guys for listening. Dr. Eleanor, thank you for sharing and being transparent.
Thank you.
Everybody out there, take care and have yourself a wonderful week.